I call to order the April 29th, 2021 budget, preliminary budget hearing. Would all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, welcome everyone, those that are joining us online for our second budget presentation to get this nailed down for the 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Bryant, the show is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Good afternoon to everybody. And as I said before, another gorgeous, gorgeous day in Henderson County. We are glad to be together for session 2. And with the board's permission, we're going to operate by reviewing the slides that we saw in the first session, just talking about some of the information that's there. There were a series of questions that were asked by the board, and we want to give you a chance to follow up on some of those questions and provide some additional information, because there were a couple of sections that we shared with you that were still in the works as it related to some joint facilities work that we do at the county commissioners and our joint facility committee, as well as our Sr2 applications and what that means for us operationally moving forward. And so I'm going to work through the series of slides that you've seen before, draw to your attention whenever those slides have been updated based on our previous conversations, and then hopefully answer some of the questions that were asked in our first session as it relates to where we are. Remembering again, this very first slide outlines for us our 2020-2021 total budget allocation, and that is our current allocation as it relates to our operations in the current fiscal year. We like to share an understanding of how the operating budget for the school system works, and that overview is critically important, I think, for not only the board, but for the general public to understand how the school system operates. About $87 million comes from state funding sources, just shy of $30 million from local, and then just shy of $9 million federal, and then other restricted is that $1.7 million. When we think about the January 2021 presentation that we shared with the Board of Commissioners in this current year, we talked about understanding the increases to our current expense and our uncontrollable operations. That's approximately 3.5% when we think about what we expect from the state retirement system, insurance expectations, state salary schedules, charter school allocations, and otherwise. I made the note about the specific designation for COVID reentry that was part of our capital budget planning in the previous year. You'll note that that's not a rollover in this upcoming school year. The fund balance trend is one of the spaces where we're going to stop for just 1 second, because there was a question by the board, but we talked a little bit about how this graph is somewhat representative of not just what's happened in the school system over the last 10 years, but also an understanding of kind of where we are right now when we think about fiscal year 11 and 12 specifically, and some of those federal dollars that came available to the board and the ways in which those were utilized to create a fund balance savings, if you will, that then was used operationally moving forward. So when you think about the purpose of the way that those dollars give the flexibility to the board moving forward, you can see the trend of intentional spend down over the last couple of years. Our current fund balance in fiscal 20 is just over $2.5 million approximately. And one of the questions I believe that the chairman asked the board, and specifically Mr. Sosha, was, so what is our comfort level? Where is it that we should be when we think about the school system's expectations about where fund balance is represented? And Mr. Sosha did some research in addition to what we shared about our philosophical practice, which was making sure that that fund balance can cash our largest check, right? It is our operational transaction, and it's important that we can, we have the cash in the bank to handle that. In his former research, and I'll ask him to give further clarifications because Mr. Sosha is already at a microphone with Dr. Fry. Remember again, he picked wisely, right? If you're going to sit with somebody, sit with the nicest person on the team. He would have picked Mr. Rhodes last. He picked Dr. Fry first. And so Mr. Rhodes has feelings too. I know, he does. He does. But Dr. Fry is gratefully sharing her microphone with Mr. Sosha. But Philip Price, the former Department of Public Instruction and Office of Education and Accountability, he was one of the chief financial officers for the state of North Carolina and Department of Public Instruction, had offered a recommendation to finance officers that that fund balance should be at least 1 month or 8% of your operation, your current expense. And so that's about where we are. That would be about $2.4 million or otherwise. And so that's kind of where ours is. When you look at the Government Financial Officers Association, they recommend 2 months, which would be double that amount, about $4.8 million. And then the Local Government Commission, or the LGC, says that that can be an arrangement that you have with your county because of the course the county may have a recommendation about where that should be because of where our local budget requests are otherwise. And so, Mr. Socia, would there be anything that you would add to that for context or information?
No, actually, that's a very good summary of all the things that I found. Those 4 agencies, that was the guidance that they have put out for school systems. I looked at other states as well, and they were equally in that range. And it comes down to comfort level of the board and what direction you feel we should be going in, as well as if you want to be involved, like the LGC says, talk it out with the county, and have dealings with the county whenever you need money if you were to have no fund balance. Every time you need it, you have to go ask them for it. So.
Right, and so as Mr. Socia said, I think one of the key pieces of opportunity here for the board is if there's a direction that you would like us to be giving consideration to as we move forward, we certainly welcome that direction and that discussion. But where we are operationally right now, based on any of those, we would be in agreement that this is the floor for us. We would not be comfortable operationally at a level that is less than that 1 month of operation or that 8%. Should the board give some direction and discussion to a fund balance that should be higher than that for us for a particular purpose, then we would certainly take that direction and move forward. But based on the research that Mr. Socia had done, this would be the bottom of that number.
So, being that I'm in the finance industry, one thing that I do tell clients quite often is how much cash you have in reserves, whether that's your AC goes out or you got to pay for a new roof or whatever. You need to have some cash reserves on hand to be able to take care of those and not put them on credit cards or whatever the case may be. And so for me, a floor is not somewhere I want to be. Yeah. Ever. Because you're one catastrophe, disaster, whatever, away from having zero, which puts you in a really bad position. And so my idea would be to make sure, I don't want to reach the 4.8 because also you don't want to have too much cash sitting on hand, right? And so you need to find a nice little medium there to give you some comfort level. And so somewhere in between that 2.4 and that 4.8 sounds good to me, that we could really take care of any type of needs that we have. Now, adding $1 million, $1.5 million, whatever it is, to fund balance in 1 year, that's certainly not feasible. And so I would like to look at ways over the next, let's call it 5 years or so, to increase that fund balance allotment by a certain percentage so that we can anticipate future costs, if that's something that we can do.
Where do you want to end up?
If you're looking at it, if it's always going to be a moving target, right? And that target's always going to be climbing every year. So if you're just going off of basically, we've got fiscal year 20 on here, you would want to be at like $3.6 million, right? And so that's going to be a moving target going forward. And so you need to be a little bit more aggressive in your earlier years to try to catch up with inflation and everything and try to get to your target. But we need to reach, another $1 million, million and some change over the next couple of years, I believe, to get to a more comfortable level of doing business.
Would we have the opportunity with any of the
Turn your mic on.
would we have the opportunity with any of our ESSER money to, pay something with that and move whatever money we're getting, whether it's from the state or locally, into fund balance?
It is those ESSER funds are going to allow us to do exactly that, Ms. Holt.
Okay.
And so with if the board's direction, if it's the will of the board to say, okay, we would like a number that's more in the range of 3.6 million or otherwise, as I was referencing fiscal 11, that's kind of exactly what happens. And then it gives the board the opportunity to decide then what becomes, as I like to say, zero, right? If 3.6 million is zero, or we're looking at a trend that sort of says keep it at that 1 month or that 1.5 month or 2 months or otherwise, the ESSER dollars will enable us to do that. And we've already been looking at strategic opportunities to be able to offset that so that, again, it gives us the ability to utilize those funds future forward or to set a different reserve for the school system.
Yeah, I definitely think we have a very unique opportunity coming up, not only this year, but next year with the ESSER funds, to create a nice, healthy fund balance for us for the future, for future boards to consider. And so that would definitely be something that I would like to look at, because that would eliminate the need to try to save 200 grand a year, 250 grand a year to try to build it up. We could hit it in one fell swoop, with the 22 million that we're getting from ESSER funds, over the next 12 months or whatever it's going to be.
Now, one thing I heard Dr. Bryant say was, in talks with your local county, they would have ideas of where your balance should be. Was that not? I'm not saying that correctly, but did you say something like that?
So that was one of the recommendations. The LGC recommends making sure you stay in a dialogue with the county, because I think it's critically important, as you heard Mr. Sosha say, when we're making budget requests annually to the county commissioners, if our fund balance has increased, they ultimately need to understand why. Because if we were to say, for example, hey, we've projected a 3.5% increase to our local current expense, but we're putting $500,000 in the bank every year, there needs to be an understanding of what the rationale behind that is.
Yeah, because I don't want. So, well, two questions. One, is the county aware of where our balance is, and then two, if we do go up, which we will, I don't want the county to say, well, you've got this money. They need to understand that we're creating a floor. I mean, that this is not, 3.6 is not to be spent back down to 2.5. I mean, 3.6 needs to be where it needs to be, and then it kind of needs to be still increasing as the years go by. But 3.6, 3.3.5, 3.6, whatever needs to be our new floor, and they need. Speaking like
It's not expendable income.
Right. Well, I think they would understand it because I think they have 8% or something as in their budget for their fund balance, but they've always had a buffer on top of that,
right.
Especially over the last couple of years. And so I think they prescribe to the same kind of financial methods that we're talking about here. But it would be, I think, a solid conversation for you to have with the city manager about county manager, excuse me, why we are doing what we're doing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The strength of our relationship is open communication and transparency. And again, knowing the rationale, the why, I think is critically important to making sure that both the local budget request and the fund balance are understood by both groups. So be glad to do that. Okay. Do I hear consensus around what is approximately $3.6 million as a target for us moving forward as we start to, again, when Mr. Sosha starts thinking about our trend and what work we'll be doing, and we'll talk more about that with ESSER3 as we move forward, as to Ms. Holt's question, where flexibility is created. But I hear 3.6 is the number that I wrote down.
Let me ask this. Is there any way, boards are going to change every 2 years and there's going to be attitude or differences and things are going to be going on. Is there any way that is this a policy type decision that we should be making to look at what we should consider our floor? We've looked at 4 different governmental agencies that have discussed what a floor should be for LEA, and we decided we wanted to do 1.5 times that or whatever that, so that we can have it's not just like a floating target in mind and then you forget it next year, 5 years or 10 years down the road. A board thought it out, said, hey, we think you should keep X amount in the bank and increase or whatever. Is that something that we could look at, or is that even
That's a good point.
thing?
Yeah, I was going to say, I would probably say take a written board directive that we would then have in our finance procedure.
Okay.
That we would have in that regard. So we'd have it, which would allow you to modify it should you need to, versus if it's been a policy, then think of what you have to do to make a change to
policies
it.
get right. I don't want to handicap anybody, but I want, say 10 years down the road, we're all off the board, nothing's happening. Why did they make that decision in 2021? Well, this is the reason that we decided to make that decision. We wanted to make sure that we weren't at a floor and didn't find ourselves not being able to pay that November supplement, you know, or whatever the case may be.
What I appreciate about what Mr. Well, exactly, we want to make sure our checks cash.
Right.
That as Mr. Socia is saying, kind of a directive, a written directive that could be part of our financial policy manual, if you will, would be most meaningful, because then it could be something that could be regularly discussed
Sure.
annually as part of our, and then to be talked about is if and when you are over or above whatever that target, the rationale why, that the board or any future board could say, okay, here was the directive we gave to administrative staff, and here's why we are or aren't tracking toward that. Yeah.
Good. If
Absolutely.
it pleases the board, let's have staff.
But we don't want to box future boards in where they can't change it.
Well, they would be able
They'd
to.
be able
Okay.
to.
There's
Okay.
nothing that would stop them from being able to use every single dollar in there if they so
Right.
desired.
You know, and I think if people ask, well, why did this board in particular, but, you know, having lived through a pandemic, I think we have certainly understood the need for flexibility of funds more than, hopefully they won't deal with this 10 years from now, but they could look back and say they were in that rainy day
Right.
situation and understood, you know, the need to have that financial flexibility.
Yes,
So,
ma'am. And I think through that lens, as you're saying, Ms. Case, and that level of flexibilities, this board could change that position at any time.
Sure,
Like
sure.
you could say today, here's where we stand right now, and if we've seen the world change in a day's time, and if that were to happen, then we could make a decision accordingly.
Yeah, I just, with everybody's okay, just kind of direct John to draft something to us. We can all read it, see if it makes sense, and then we can vote on it in the future. I don't know if that's even a voting matter, but send that directive to the finance department, say next month at our next meeting. That works for everybody?
Sounds good. Thank you very much. The charter school enrollment, again, just is an overview for everybody, and the reminder that these are pass-through dollars. They are part of our request to Henderson County Board of Commissioners, because as soon as a student from Henderson County enrolls in a charter school in the state of North Carolina, even if that charter school is not in Henderson County, those dollars follow the student. And so we have to estimate what we think those numbers are going to be. We have to prepare for those numbers, because those dollars have to move with the students. Again, one more reminder as it relates to the presentation to the Board of Commissioners in terms of understanding what our current expense ask was. And I want to just draw your attention to this bottom number here, bottom right-hand, because you're going to see this number change a little bit later, and I'm going to talk to you about why. That was the original MRTS money, Maintenance, Repair, Technology, and Security, based on the 4-year valuation and what the county expects to collect in property tax. And so that initial number for the first 2 periods was $4.67 million. So if you make a little mental note of that in terms of this is the presentation in January, I'll talk when we get to the slides on MRTS about how that number has changed. Specific to our current budget request, 3.5% for those increase to current expense and uncontrollables, capital outlay at $1.5 million, $0 in COVID reentry, and then our total budget with the initial capital MRTS money dollar figure associated with it. We presented to this board really 3 things, or 2 things with an asterisk, if you will, when we were thinking about what our current expense request would be for that little over $1 million in terms of a 3.5% increase. Mr. Socia reminds us the uncontrollables have to be attended to. And we value that because we have to be conservative in our thought process around that. The state of North Carolina sets the state salary schedules for teachers and administrators, and oftentimes legislates the salary increases, the percent increase that all employees get. They also change the retirement rates and the hospitalization rates, and insurance costs go up and otherwise. And so we think about the impact to the school system. We have to put a placeholder there of little over $700,000 while we wait on the state budget to be approved. And again, if I could emphasize that again, we have to submit our request to the county prior to May 15th. That's statutory requirement. The state may not approve a budget till long after that. And if that's the case, we have to anticipate what those costs might be and then make adjustments accordingly. So we have to be very conservative in our thoughtfulness in that regard. With the remaining approximately $300,000, we've asked this board to consider an increase to local supplement for certified and non-certified staff. We're asking as a placeholder for a 0.25% increase. Again, that would touch every single employee, moving certified staff supplement to 8.5 to 8.75, non-certified from 6.25 to 6.5, with a goal of this board considering as much as a 0.5% supplement increase, depending on what that uncontrollable line ends up being. that this board could say, all right, well, the state increases were different than we expected or we anticipated, and so we can potentially increase our local supplement in a different way. Now, there are a couple of questions that were asked around this slide that I want to address for just 1 second as it relates to the certified piece. There was a question, I believe it was Mrs. Case, there was a question about what percentage of our employees are certified, what are non-certified, when those last changed. And so the last increases to those local salary supplements were in 2015-16 and 2016-17. So there was a 2-year period where first the non-certified was, or the certified was moved, and then the non-certified was moved. And so that's the last time that those have been moved. Again, that touches every single employee group, which is why that's critically important. And if I can simply revisit the statement that I made before, this is about our marketability in the region. This is about recruitment. This is about retention. This is about keeping pace with other school systems that are recruiting teachers that we also want to recruit. We equip Mr. Rhodes with greater resources when he has a market competitiveness when he's talking about working in Western North Carolina or in the state of North Carolina. Our 2 closest competitors, as I shared with this board in that respect, are Buncombe County Schools and Asheville City Schools. Their local supplement starts at 9%, and then it ranges all the way up to 16% based on years of service with that school system. So we're behind the curve in that respect, but we want to, again, stay competitive. We recognize the cost of the school system in moving that. There was also a question, and I'm just going to tie it to this certified, non-certified question about the number or the percent of employees that found themselves in these 10-month group and 12-month groups. Like how many people are 12-month employees? How many folks are 10-month employees? 83% of our workforce is 10-month. So you think about the standard teacher contract or people that work during the student school year. About 17% of our employee workforce is 11 months or more. So again, we're asking the board to give those considerations. I'll be glad, Mr. Craven, to pause right here and answer any questions the group might have. Again, as I noted, the certified staff supplement increased it in 15-16, and non-certified went up in 16-17. So we're about 4 years, 5 years from the last change. Questions about that?
It's time.
And all God's children said amen. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else on that front? Nope. Okay. The capital outlay, remembering we've been rethinking capital outlay over the last several years, being far more strategic in our planning, our long-range visioning, and making sure that we're thinking about not just our emergency needs, but our safety enhancements, as this board has made safety a priority for students and staff in our school communities, as well as asset preservation, planning, design, renovation, and expansion, because we know those things are necessary. I love talking about the fact that we have 2 million square feet of facility. We have 23 franchises across the school system, right? We are present in every community across Henderson County. It's important that the quality of those facilities, the care of those facilities, and the resources available to our staff and students are not dependent on zip code. You remember we were speaking to that particular piece, and that's why capital outlay becomes very, very important. This is the original slide, and I'm going to note the second one is the revised slide. We spent some time discussing each of these elements. We talked about why those were important. We talked about how those were prioritized by the group and the value in which we place on addressing needs within our school system and addressing opportunities for our students, our staff, and our school communities. There was some discussion specifically about the first piece because, again, year one of our enterprise contract has been long delayed as we've evaluated the contractual piece, but that's necessary. We don't want to sign anything until we've been through it with a fine-tooth comb. But as it relates to where we are in the school year, what you'll see at this particular point is that number revised down, because if we prorate for the remainder of the year, all that's needed next year is $30,000 of that original budgeted $80,000. Okay, because we have a cost savings of about $50,000 that we had originally budgeted that can roll over. I believe it was Mr. Craven asked about that piece that was unspent that can roll over to reduce that number down. And then the remaining $50,000 that was associated with that has just been moved to strategic capital. Now, I moved it there because the board can consider leaving it there for a future determined purpose, or as we shared at the end of our last meeting, there were a series of alternates that this board could consider and we could have some discussion around. The value of strategic capital, as we've mentioned before, is we've learned a lot about what happens over the course of a 12-month period, that there may be some new priority that we have or some need that the school system wants to be able to address. And strategic capital gives you the flexibility to consider those kinds of things throughout the year. So again, the numbers that are revised there, as I mentioned, and Mr. Socia, I'll turn to you one more time if there's anything that you want to add. It left us, about, like I said, we were looking at the math there and realizing that that new budget amount needed to be $30,000, and since we had a placeholder of $80,000, we shuffled that $50,000 down. And I get the head nod from Mr. Socia. I'm ahead of the game. Absolutely. Questions about those revisions or any other notes associated with capital outlay?
I got a couple.
Yes, sir.
This is our second year funding the instruments.
Yes, sir.
How many years do you anticipate that we need to put the 90,000 in there?
Forevermore, amen.
Every year.
I think that's
How many instruments? What does that buy? Like, what are we buying?
Well, a tube is like 12 grand.
right.
Yeah,
I'd be
I
glad.
know the snares or the quads are expensive.
I know what we did in that year one was we spent a great deal of time evaluating kind of the inventory, the age, the condition, those kinds of things, and then we created a structure and allotment figure, if you will, for our middle schools and our high schools, and distributed that back out.
Didn't we give it to the high schools, and then high schools gave stuff down to the middle schools?
I'll have to let Dr.
how
Fry
that
speak
went?
to that. If I remember correctly, we had a calculated allotment for every individual school.
For
Yes,
every
ma'am.
individual school.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not certain. I do think I remember hearing that equipment was shared, but I do have the allotment figures if you would like those.
Sure.
Okay, so for middle schools, all middle schools received a base budget of $5,000. And then took into consideration the number of string students and the number of band students to create a total enrollment. And then an additional $1,450 per student was calculated to determine the total budget for that year. And then high school allotments were each high school received a base of $10,000 and then took into consideration the string students, number of strings, and number of band students for total enrollment, and then added $16 per student. And the total came to a little less than $90,000.
Okay.
And if I could
you
speak-
can't
I like
even
that better.
buy one. I mean, you can't even buy one tube.
So
I mean,
know
you
we
know,
bought a French horn is $2,500.
yeah,
So I get it.
it's crazy.
And I think what we so value about this board's dialogue and support of, let's just use that as an example, is that 90,000 was set as a catch-up number, right? We recognized it.
Yeah.
So there may come a time when we can revise that down, but to eliminate a replacement schedule fund then means we'll get behind again,
Sure.
right? And the vision of the board was saying, these elements that you see about scheduled replacement allow us to be able to say, like, we don't find ourselves in that position where we've not invested in something in 20 years or 30 years, or we've not kept up with what it is. But I think it would be helpful for us to be able to share with you all. So show us how that's updated the inventory. Show us what that projection has looked like. And we'll be glad to bring that to light moving forward about what was replaced. How has this helped us catch up? And maybe how long do we expect that number to be what
What's
it
the
is?
useful life? How long do we
Yes, sir.
expect to have them? That sort of thing. So
Yes, sir.
So are they getting this money and they're able to keep it for a while? Like, for instance, if they have a piano that they want to buy, or whatever that's more expensive, are they allowed to keep that for a couple of years and then do that, or is it you need to spend it all?
I'm going to let Mr. Socia either answer this question or tell us TBD. It was my understanding that the direction that we gave folks was right now it was about replacement schedules. It wasn't about saving up for future other things. It was about, like, we're about catching up. If you have these other needs, then let us know and we'll look around, because we see these allocations as like within this current year, right? We want to benefit the current kids, the current schools right now. And so the purpose was spend that money on the replacement things that you need. But we realize there are some other things that they may determine are far larger ticket than just that. And those
Right.
would be continued dialogues. And so, Mr. Socia, anything you'd add to that?
No, I was going to say the same thing. The direction was, we know the needs are great right now. Spend, that was we don't need to save. We have enough needs that we're going to spend the money now. And like Dr. Bryant said, there may be a time where you have those things where the annual allotment's not enough to buy the instrument that you need, and it may take 1.5 years worth of that, but we're not there yet. We're at the point where we can spend every dollar just to get what we do need already.
Okay, and I would just like it that if they have, because I mean, I know they have instruments from like the '60s. I mean, they're in bad shape. That we could have some dialogue and say, okay, this year we could budget in, 50,000 for X, over what's keeping them where they need to be. So,
Is there any consideration to taking this extra funds for the fleet management contract and adding a little more to the musical instrument replacement this year? I mean,
yeah.
I think Dr. Bryan on the very last slide is going to show you a list of things that he would probably like before that. But
They've already spent it.
but we can certainly, I mean, we can do whatever we decide.
And we work at the pleasure of the board. So, to that end, I think, again, this is the beauty, that's the beauty of this workshop session, right? Is an opportunity for the board to have discussion about, so where do we see that? Because we recognize everything that you have around scheduled replacement up there could benefit from additional funding.
exactly.
Because that's what we're doing is we're playing catch up right now. We are playing catch up because those are dollars that had previously not existed. And so whether it be allocations toward additional school bus activity buses or allocations toward band instruments or allocations toward classroom furniture, every one of those is in a different opportunity. And as Mr. Craven said, when we get to the last slide, there are other capital needs across the school system. We talk about deferred maintenance frequently in our school system. And usually the things that we address are those things that have risen to the level of like emergency room need, right? These are high priorities. The beauty of where we are right now is we have received the kind of resources that are allowing us to start to make huge steps forward. And that support from the commissioners, our capital outlay, the MRTS money are the things that are letting us do that. And so whether it is band instruments or some other element that you see there, it gives us opportunity.
All right, I've got a couple more questions. So
Yes, sir.
next, annual maintenance, athletic facility improvements. Can you just expand on a little bit, Mr. Rhodes? 125 grand in athletic facility improvements.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Craven. One of the things that we've
halfway
really
down.
noticed as when we start looking at some of our facilities as it relates to seating capacities, like at our football stadiums, some of the things that we need to upgrade as far as ADA, some things like that where we've been grandfathered in, and we really need to be able to have that flexibility to make some of those needed changes. So that's one of the things that sticks out the most when we start thinking about those athletic improvements, as it really comes to those stadium capacities and those ADA compliance.
Okay.
I would add to that, Mr. Rhodes has been a real champion of this in our system, is a lot of times our athletic facilities have been sort of the responsibility of the school communities in which the kids attend. And that burden has been displaced on parents and families and booster clubs. And so the quality of your dugouts or your backstop or the fence that goes around your field, whatever that athletic facility is, has not necessarily been a school system responsibility. And so we recognize, again, there are many elements to that athletic element, but when we start talking about bleachers, ADA access, stadium facilities across the board, indoors and outdoors, we have the ability to make some investments there that take that burden off of our school communities and allow us to make some investments on behalf of them.
But these athletic buses, that's a little misleading because they're used for everybody in the county from K-12. And so it's not just athletic when we replace those activity buses.
Oh, yes, ma'am. When we're speaking about the athletic facility improvements, that's a capital investment. To your point, Ms. Case, the line there that says activity bus is not about athletics at all. It's about any activity for any student. Yes, sir. Any student activity, whether we're taking third graders to the symphony, and we look forward to doing that again in the future, or we are taking, students to the Ag Center, or we are participating in the orientation meetings from our sixth graders, at the middle schools, or our ninth graders at the high schools. Activity buses serve all student functions. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Mr. Egoff, do you have a question?
And I know I should know this, so don't laugh, but tell me again what auto scrubbers are.
Absolutely. Auto scrubbers are the machine that we used to clean the floors. So when you think about all the tile floors across the whole school.
Oh,
Not for
okay.
an auto.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, not a Viet. No, sir. We're
One
not.
of those, my
I was
dealership.
like, wait a minute. How much does that cost?
Exactly. We're going to start our own car wash.
Can I detail the inside too?
he knew one of the great ways we could upgrade the student experience was to have our own car wash. No, in all seriousness, yeah, an auto scrubber is
2 cents in about
it's
that.
it's the machine that our custodial staff use to clean the tile floors.
That's okay.
Yes, sir.
I could use that in my
Yeah,
car.
me too. The last one I have, so this is just something for the board to think about. So we're leasing lights. We're getting ready to lease like 4 sets of lights, right? North baseball and softball field need them. They're the only ones. Well, Hendersonville doesn't have field, but they're the only ones that don't have lights right now. And they do need lights. Would it be more advantageous? And one, I want to know if there's a prepayment penalty on some of these leases that we do have. We've got 250 grand in undesignated. Let me tell you where I'm coming from. So we're in year 3 of the softball fields for what is it, East and West. I hate having payments. I hate it. I don't like that. I don't like it at all. And so if we've got 250 grand in undesignated strategic capital, plus we've got ESSER money coming for this and ESSER money coming for that, it might be a good time to pay off those lights. But if there's an early payoff penalty or anything like that associated with it, it usually doesn't make it very advantageous to do so. So do you know if there is early payment?
Are we paying any interest on
Yeah,
this, or-
that's the
I
biggest.
think that's the base. That's the base thing. I don't think you're gonna save money by paying it off.
It's just clearing off,
It's just
clearing it off
yeah,
the books.
it's like you're clearing it off the books. I just hate owing money every single year because that's a placeholder for the next
Right.
3 more years.
I know. I like paying things off where we're saving the interest on it. You know, like
I don't know. Do we pay? There's no interest. There's interest built into it. I'm sure.
Right, it's all rolled into that package deal. I don't think there was an early payoff on that one, but I will certainly double check that one this afternoon. and-
Well, you would balance that against the savings and interest against the prepayment penalty.
Exactly. Yeah, that would be one
So
way
you
to
would
look at
see
it.
which one would be more. That's exactly right. If we can get rid of anything right now,
Pay it off.
great.
Because I mean that saves us 55 grand a year going forward. At least on the we could only do 2 of them based on what we have sitting there in undesignated. That's 70. Well, if you count this year, that's $100,000 we pay off for East, and then West would be another 100 grand. That's $200,000 to pay those off. Something to think about. It's not necessary. I just don't like carrying. We don't have
You
to.
just don't
carry.
know what's going to happen in the future, and if we have the ability, at least get some more information on paying it off.
We'll be glad to do so. We'll review those contracts and let the board know what the options are there, so that they could consider how that might be adjusted. Yep.
Cool.
There were 2 other board questions related to this spreadsheet, and I just want to address those. One was a question about painting the school buses, the colors,
Yeah.
the activity buses
Okay.
specifically. It was yes, sir, Mr. Craven, about that, and we did investigate that, and our transportation director did affirm that you can in fact paint them any color you want. If you wanted to paint them school spirit colors, you could. Ours are sort of a white with what I would call a brown strip down the middle kind of thing right now, which is not a school color anywhere. However, it is important to note the activity buses are used by all schools. They are not, while they often will be cited at a specific school, we talked about this briefly. The board should understand before we ever considered painting them any specific colors that they get shared across the district. And there's frequently situations where one bus that might historically be, for example, at East High every day would show up at West Henderson High School based on the needs of that school because
fun.
activity bus. Yeah, exactly. I know. Why didn't the band go to the Yeah, exactly. Because
they
weren't
weren't
riding
getting
that
on that
bus.
bus.
Right? They weren't riding that East High bus.
Is there an extra cost to paint the bus? Anything other than the white and brown?
Not that I'm aware of.
You're talking about the new ones we get, not going back.
Yeah, now go back and paint.
Yeah.
them.
Right.
What
But
about
like,
putting the
why do
logo?
we? Why are they white and brown? They're just ugly.
Thank you. Yes, sir. No, I'm just
Colors
kidding.
are brand new- What colors are brand new athletic buses?
They're white and brown.
All of them. If
All
they're
of
not
'em.
new ones.
Well, generally the activity bus is just, I think that's just a standard opportunity for us to get them in, to get a custom color where we can look at numbers and
Make it
those
look
kind
a
of
little
things.
fresher.
But it
maybe.
costs more to put the logo on.
I know we've got some decals in our pocket. You know,
Oh,
maybe
now
we
see,
could
that
decal.
would be nice.
yeah.
Henderson
I would love to have
County.
4 or 5 different decals on it. Make sure you put the Roadrunners on there. And
Mhm.
are they Roadrunners? Yes,
are, yeah.
Roadrunners. Yes,
each of the high schools decals on there, so this way it works for any school, and it's like
But all of-
advertisement. It gets
yeah.
people excited. They drive
Even
past
if it's
them.
all white and you slap some things
Well,
on
put
there.
put all the logos on there. Put the Henderson County
Right.
Yeah,
logo,
everybody.
the East,
Yeah.
West, Bearcat,
Just make it spice it up a little bit.
North.
Spice it up. Duly noted.
Doesn't cost anything else. Why not?
Yes, sir. We will
add
explore those.
marketing.
I like
Explore
it.
those
It is
options.
marketing, right?
We'll add some hot sauce.
And
Like it.
the
Put a
other
Valentino
question
to it.
associated with this spreadsheet is I was talking about the 2 million square feet and that $1 million being 50 cents a square foot or otherwise. And Dr. Revis, I believe, was there a standard number that's recommended from DPI? And we were unable to locate such a number. Mr. Taylor, I think, spent hours in the Library of Congress. He was unable to find any of that information. Because it is such a floating number, but we do recognize we've got additional resource toward that here moving forward. Any other questions about capital outlay or what is listed on the spreadsheet or the changes that have been made? We'll do a little bit of homework on those other
They look
things.
good to me. Let's just look at the softball field lighting and just see. It might not make sense, but just give us the option.
Right. May even give you the option of savings on those new contracts that don't
Absolutely.
require an interest
And
at all.
that's another thing, you could actually look at, if we don't lease those, can we pay off one of them? So the baseball field is 180 grand. The other one looks like 150 grand. Can you pay it off and can it be cheaper?
Yes,
Well,
sir.
because we're gonna, hopefully, sooner rather than later, we're gonna be adding in 2 more lighted fields.
Absolutely.
But I would just like to advocate before we try to pay off a lease that we're already into.
Yep.
I would like to look at increasing our support of our band and strings program.
Okay.
That's just, I'm one
And
person.
what do you
I
think?
agree.
What do you think is? I guess the question then for
Or-
you
or-
guys is what would be appropriate?
or-
Is it appropriate now? Because we didn't do this until last year. It was
Right.
the first time we put the
Or,
90 grand in there.
I'm assuming, and I may be incorrect, but I'm assuming that there is a way we could get into leasing those big ticket item instruments as
Sure.
well. I mean, I just really feel like, we've got an issue here with our instruments and our band and our strings.
I agree, Kathy. But I think you need input from your band directors
Yes.
and your string teachers before we make any decision
I
as far
agree.
as money goes.
I-
But I think we need their input first.
I think it would be pretty easy for them to get that to us because they had to turn in last year a
They did,
spreadsheet
yeah.
of all what they had and what was junk and what
Mhm.
was good.
I'll be honest. What I really like about this budget compared to a lot of other capital outlays that we've done in the past is that it is pretty well spread out between the arts, athletics, and other needs. And when I first came on this board, there was hardly any arts related issues on there at all, and I'm fully in support of the arts in every form. Some of our kids come to school to play football, some come to school to play the trumpet. And so I want to make sure
Yeah.
that we can.
And we know
help all
those kids stay
those.
out of trouble.
A-
Those
absolutely.
kids are absolutely.
Absolutely.
And
I would suggest though, before I think like thinking about it now, the lease on the softball field lighting, I think once you're in those, right? I would really like to look at paying off for the baseball or softball field lights and not get into a lease on maybe one of the north lights. Because we could pay off one of them and still have $100,000 before you get in the lease. You could pay off the north softball field lights for 150 grand. You got 100,000 left in undesignated. If you need to slap another 10 or $20,000 into the musical program or whatever you think we need to do, then awesome, you've got it there. But I don't like leases. I don't like owing money. So if that's something that we can save a few bucks,
We could leave it in undesignated and talk about that.
absolutely, we can leave it exactly like
Absolutely.
this, and then we can come back and make those decisions.
And
once they
we
get
can
back
do
to us.
some of the homework that's being talked about to sort of share. So what would that look like?
We just need the placeholders now.
right.
And to me, the placeholders this looks better than a lot that we've done in the past.
do we still give a band uniform allocation?
Mhm.
We still do that? Okay. Has that been increased any to take care of inflation? I think it was $5,000 when I was working here, so.
Yeah, it hasn't been so much increased, but what we did, with the change we made to it was we reallocated it where one or one school each year would get a large amount of money, and the other two would get like a maintenance amount of money.
Okay.
So that one school would know that they were going to get a large influx of money in this year. So if they're doing a fundraiser, that would be their target year to
On a
make big
rotation
purchase,
basis or
and then it would
whatever,
rotate through.
valuables. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
What instruments do we pay for? Because parents used to have to lease
So that's
their
yes,
own,
it's the big ones.
just like.
The quads,
This, okay.
the snares. I know we pay for like the trumpets. We pay for some French horns. We pay for keyboards, tubas.
Right,
So
and it was
it's
the
really
key
the
thing too.
trumpets,
Right.
the clarinets,
No, I
and
don't think-
some of the string
yeah.
instruments that
Parents
parents
have to
are
lease.
responsible for.
The lease or buy.
And we need to keep in mind to have some undesignated funds for children whose parents can't afford those things.
Right.
We need to provide equal access.
That's a great point because the
I
reason
think
I never
they do
joined
that.
band is because my mom couldn't afford the
Exactly.
saxophone.
I think
That should be taken off, that should be taken totally off.
So
Right.
we went through this process 3 years ago with Lucas trying to figure out what it is. And I'll be honest, renting those things are expensive. Buying it's expensive. The whole process is expensive. And so I like that idea a lot.
The schools do have extra, and they do that already.
But you know what? I remember going to band performances when my daughter was at rugby, and if you look at the participants, they all looked alike.
God
I'm
bless you.
just, you know, God bless you. I thought that was like a sneeze. You were agreeing with me. I like it. But it seemed to be all of your middle to upper class white
It's the-
students who were in the
That's what
band.
it is.
And I think it was prohibitive, the cost of instruments, that we didn't have any participation from any of our students who would have loved to have participated but couldn't afford to.
How do we handle that now? How do we handle if your parent can't afford to pay Tempo the monthly $80 or $50 or whatever it is, or $120?
Could we go along with what, like free and reduced lunch numbers? Could we use that as our guideline?
Again, I think as Ms. Holt said, you know, we know that we have some instruments that we can loan out that are ours owned. I think the key for us, and Dr. Fry can speak to this better, is to just make sure that access is available to all, that there isn't some shortfall that we're unaware of.
So how do we do that?
Again, I would speak to an understanding of what those needs are, speaking to our band directors, speaking to, like, do we have people that are needing us to provide the instrument and we're having to turn them away? I don't know that as a data point in this moment, but I know that what we can do is make sure that we're checking with our folks that that's not a circumstance. And
I think it's not a data point that you're ever going to see. I think when I went to the parent meeting, right, or whatever it was, or you go in, you sit down, you're like, okay, your kid can pick this way or this way, and they're going to take this class or this class, and we have like 4 of these to use, but we're giving them to 8th graders or whatever, so you can go through Tempo or another organization, I forget who it was, and you could rent the instrument. But then you get that information, you're like, oh, that's awesome, that's cool, and you go home, and mom's like, nah. And so you don't hear about it.
I think you're correct. That's gonna be a hard data point to.
It's hard. How
collect.
do you find that? Because it's when the parent goes home after that meeting, they're like, listen, we can't do that. It's $100 a month just to rent the thing.
If we value the arts, it should be equal access, just like athletics.
All right,
See, that would be, I think, you guys talking to
band
the
directors and
principals
stuff.
and the band directors, but I know, I only had Fran Shelton boss me around, but Buddy Gudger did a little bit, but I worked under Fran for 8 years, and, I mean, she would come to me all the time and say, hey, I need help, this kid wants to go to Chicago, his parents can't afford it, will you pay for him?
Friends a little bit more outspoken than most people.
Right. So, I don't know what the other schools do, but I know there was a lot of, and the band boosters there, I know, or when I was there, were very, very active, and we had a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know,
I think the issue is 6th grade.
right.
Because
is
if you
when
don't get
they're
in
coming
6th grade, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Fran wouldn't let you be in the band if you didn't play 6th grade band.
Yeah,
back
she
in the day.
would. She started beginning band.
Did she?
Mhm.
In high school?
In high school.
Could we also possibly encourage our graduating seniors who have no interest in continuing
To sell them
Sit
back,
down.
pass them
to
down, whatever.
donate them?
Donate it. That's a good thought.
You
There's a
know?
lot of, I have all my.
I know we have a
bunch I
flute.
could give
that-
to- I haven't even thought about that. They're just taking
Right.
up room in my house.
Right. I mean, we hold on to them. We don't really think about it, but that that can make such a difference for a child who can't
Absolutely.
participate.
Absolutely.
Because those Yamaha like trumpets will last. I mean, they'll last a long time.
We've proven that.
And speaking of, I did find the inventory for both orchestra and band instruments for all schools, where the instructors previously have listed the description of the instrument, the manufacturer, the condition, excellent, good, fair, poor, and the date manufactured. So I will follow up on those. And I found a keyboard from a 2018 graduate I would love to donate as well, just as an aside.
What we'll also do is that other piece, which is, when you talked about kind of that moment in time that says, we only have 4 that we can give you, or these are your options. If you eliminate that part of the conversation and figuring out, okay, what kind of inventory is necessary, so that we would say to anybody, like, if you need a clarinet, we're going to make sure you have a clarinet, or if you need a trumpet, you need a trumpet. We can explore that with our band leaders based on, their historical knowledge, our directors of our programs, who would say, this is the kind of inventory that will allow me to have, like, again, a starting point and a building point, so that access doesn't become an issue. Because I think to guess at that puts us in a really bad spot, but to be able to say, we don't want anyone to go home, and Mr. Craven's point, and the rationale behind not participating is because I don't have the resources to do it, right? That if we're going to offer that kind of programming, that we would get in front of that. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Case?
But if you take kids who cannot afford it, they're probably not going to come to the band meeting anyway.
Yeah,
But
I
then
think
when they go home, the parents are not going to do it. We really need to go to the 6th grade teachers or whoever who knows these kids, knows the home situation, and go
fifth grade.
there. Or okay.
I think
5th
we need
grade.
to.
Or go to the high school 9th grade. These people are the ones who know the home situation. And the band director, he can't know, unless he started with 6th grade band and came up, he can't know all the home situations of where the equity needs to go. So I think not just band directors, but I think we need to go to those teachers who know their kids.
Yeah,
Right.
I definitely would like you guys to put some stuff together for this, because clearly this is going to be a focus of the boards. You're right. It's 5th grade. When we're doing those orientations for kids in the 6th grade, that's when they're really being introduced. And I think Lucas, they just did a concert for the 5th graders a week or 2 ago on the field or whatever, and then they try to get the kids signed up and do all that. So we need to talk to them then.
Band director, somehow touching at the elementary school level, it'd be just a couple of phone calls. You don't have to call every teacher, but
Right.
the principal. Hey, who do you have there? These kids came. Who do you think would be an issue that we might need to reach out and say, hey, we have.
You guys find a way for us to not, have a kid that was in 5th grade that wanted to play saxophone, that couldn't afford the saxophone and never did it. Let's find them, find out how much it is, and we'll fund it.
And this is true with athletics too.
Oh,
There's lots of kids who would like to play, but they don't have the transportation to get there, and they don't have this. So, this equity goes in everything we do in school.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We'll work on that. Any other questions about capital outlay as it exists here?
We got it.
You know me very well. I'm a clock person. The MRTS, or Maintenance, Repair, Technology, and Security, this is a slide that is brand new. And so I want to take a big moment to pause with this one as it relates to this being a product of, again, our tremendous partnership with the Board of Commissioners and their involvement with our Joint Facilities Committee efforts. Our Joint Facility Committee met yesterday with members of the Board of Commission and county staff to talk about our priorities. And note that this is representative of 2 fiscal years, because we've tried to outline 2 plans. And I want to pause, and I want you to remember the number that I asked you to keep in mind from the beginning. It was $4.67 million in the first 2 fiscal years. You see a number there now that's $4.89 million. The reason for that increase, and the county manager mentioned this at Joint Facilities yesterday for our staff, is they've seen about a 1% increase in that property tax collection rate. What that means is almost $200,000 of additional money for us, because ours is a function of the tax rate. Remember, 3 cents of the property tax is directly related to capital outlay needs for the school system on this maintenance, repair, technology, and security. And so those items, the recommendations that are associated with that are here for this board's consideration and understanding. First and foremost, we have long been talking about the need for large-scale security camera infrastructure that's highly functional, that's all on the same platform. And again, I want to speak to this very specifically. The cameras that exist in our school system outside of the brand new facilities have been at the expense of the schools. The schools themselves have fundraised the dollars for security camera functionality and otherwise. And many of those systems are all different. They don't talk to each other. They're not compatible. And then servicing those, maintaining those presents a real challenge. Several years ago, when we started talking about the need for school safety elements across the board, we recognized the need for a fully integrated large school system that could not only talk to all elements of that, but was highly functional in the way that it was utilized. And so what you see is kind of a breakout here of splitting that total cost, which is about $1.45 million, in half. You would see the first cost going to our middle schools and high schools, those high prioritized areas as it relates to a fully fleshed out and integrated system across all of our campuses, and then all of our elementary schools being in the phase 2 of that work over year 2. The deferred MRTS from previous year, we had roofing and paving projects to the tune of about $650,000 that were in those previous 2 years that were not able to be done. Remember, it was year 1 of MRTS in which COVID struck. Right? We were in March of 2020 and everything stopped. And then we had an extended period of time where those projects were all put on pause. And then they were released in February of 2021. And we set a couple of priorities, the rugby main entrance, the upward main entrance. But there were a number of other projects that just didn't get done in that period of time. And so we rolled all those projects to the right. Again, some significant paving and roofing work that would be taken care of there. We have a scheduled replacement of East Henderson High School's old gym roof, which is the $200,000 placeholder you see there. West Henderson would be one of those items off our 10-year facility assessment that comes down to a renovation and addition. One of the board's priorities was this kind of constructing fully enclosed campuses. And if you go to West Henderson High School, first of all, until recently, is even really hard to understand where the front door was, right? Mrs. Auten, during her leadership there, her administrative team did a great job of creating some signage so that you knew this is where the main entry is. However, it still is one of those campuses you can walk well into the middle of the campus without ever entering the school building. And that's a safety concern. That's a security concern. It's one of the things that we're doing at the new Hendersonville High School, that you'll have a new facility that you can fully articulate without ever walking outside the building. This $2 million renovation would be about enclosing that very front part of the courtyard. It would be an addition that sort of would create a new main entrance, a new lobby area, and otherwise. But it was one of the strategic priorities of our high schools associated with that. Project Empower is a regular player on our MRTS. It has a $300,000 placeholder. Remember, that's sustainability. That's that replacement schedule. If Mr. Fender were here with us today, he would remind us, right? You can't invest in those devices one time. That has to be an ongoing investment as we continue to do that. Bus garage, and I'm going to speak to this in both places, the first phase of that would be advanced planning and design. On our 10-year facility assessment, we outlined that as one of the early priorities. We have long needed a new transportation facility. It is woefully under-equipped for what it is, both by acreage and resources and the condition of that facility. I think Mr. Craven has frequently said to folks, if you don't believe us, let us take you on a tour. We'd love to share with you that our transportation department can neither properly service or care for the new buses that we're receiving because the facility cannot accommodate those. And there's an opportunity in this current budget to have that discussion, but it would require some advanced planning and design so that you would be ready to go shovel ready in the next year. Next to the last line there, we have a new construction warehouse. Again, if we've learned anything over this COVID period, especially as we've been navigating moving in and out of a variety of buildings, is we have no true flex space in our school system. Like, our school system is chock full at all the sites where our kids are and operationally. Our maintenance department is at a great disadvantage, often using out-of-service mobile classroom units as storage facilities. And when those are not properly conditioned and otherwise, the materials and the things that are stored in there are not properly cared for. Again, a long overdue need for the system would be a warehouse, a large square footage facility that both could support our enterprise programs, our operational programs, but will allow us to deal with things like we're dealing with now. When you think about flex space for, I'll use Hendersonville High School as an example, we're moving out of that facility in June. We don't get to move back in until August. And everything that we're moving out, we don't have anywhere for it to go. We're having to rent or find additional space for that. We don't have the ability to flex our own muscle in that respect. The last,
Is that over there by Biltmore?
yes, ma'am, that
Baptist?
would be
Okay.
on our current property.
Okay.
That's what I was going to ask where it was.
Yes, sir. So it's where our current property is off of Upward Road. We've got significant acreage right there. We've done some of the planning and design work already. It essentially would be one of those metal buildings that you can imagine. We'd be laying a concrete pad, and then we'd be putting a metal building up.
What was the size? Do you know?
I'm sorry?
Do you know the
I'll
size?
get the size for you. I don't know that right off the top of my head. Ms. Trailer might be able to look that up. I've got that that I can pull it up and let you know. But it's a pretty large facility, yes, sir. So it'd be one that we would be able to, fully drive any of our vehicles into, load and unload large trucks. 18-wheelers do deliveries there. All that.
And heated?
It would be conditioned, yes, sir. The last item up there is contingency and strategic capital, and you'll see that on both lines, and that's just shy of a 10% line item. When you think about why that's there, it's essentially the remaining budget amount. Why we've listed that, and we mentioned that to county staff and the commissioners yesterday, is prices that we put on the board right now are moving targets. And I think it was Mr. Wyatt said one of the scariest parts is many of these budget items are moving targets that are running away from you right now. If you know anything about the price of lumber, what we've seen that do in the last 12 months, it's triple, quadruple. We have to have the ability to be flexible, the board does, to say, okay, here's the dollar figure that we associated with that, and we've got the ability to flex some resources toward that as needed, whether those things come up to adjust a price once things go out to bid, or to address another element of what's happening in that space. Obviously, again, as those dollars come toward the end of a fiscal year, you've got the ability to designate them towards some other purchase or some other strategic opportunity. But we left those there because we've learned a lot about how pricing fluctuates in really, really rapid periods. The fiscal year 23 is a little bit tighter, and then I'll answer questions about that. If I start from the bottom again, you'll see that there's a contingency there. There's a paving element there because that's part of our again, scheduled and annual maintenance over the period of time. When you look at our 10-year facility assessment, how we stay caught up on those things is to be able to address that. And we have hundreds and hundreds of acres of parking lots associated with that as well. Chromebooks, Project Empower continues to have a placeholder. The security camera phase 2, which is the elementary schools. And then we would have a placeholder there for the construction of a new transportation facility or a bus garage, which would give us the opportunity to move out of the 3 acres that we currently have and better equip our transportation department for the generations of service to our school system moving forward.
Do we have room out at the upward property for the bus garage?
No, sir, we don't. It would involve, and Mr. Craven and Ms. Holt can speak to this as members of the joint facilities discussion. It would involve a property transfer with the county. That's a great question. The bus garage's recommendation is about 12 acres is what you'd be looking for based on a school system of our size, and our current facility out at maintenance would not be able to accommodate that independently of itself.
So we'll talk a little bit about kind of the discussions that we had yesterday. It kind of fits into this, but before I get into that, I want you guys to understand that this $4.8 million wasn't always around. This is relatively new. They added 2 cents to the tax rate, or 3 cents for us. 3 cents for us. 2 for the. That's right. For us to be able to do this, normally we'd be spending that $1.5 million, and that's it. Nothing else. And so I'd really like to thank Bill Lapsley, who really helped develop this and come up with this, because if you're not maintaining your buildings, you're spending a whole heck of a lot more when you got to build them all new or whatever. So I appreciate the county for going over this with us, and we went over all of these numbers with that 2 commissioners and their staff yesterday. So as far as the bus garage goes, what we would be looking at doing right now is there's significant property that the county owns really to the right. I guess that's the north of Sugarloaf Elementary. Is that the right side?
It's
Behind it, yeah, somewhere right there. And we would swap, what's the acreage, 18?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's more than what we would need.
It's about 18 acres that they would swap with us for our current bus garage, which is at the landfill. That property is very important to them because clearly they own everything else except for what we own for that bus garage. So we would swap those pieces of property, and then we would be then responsible for building the building using these capital outlay funds to get that done. And so that's how that's come about. They have agreed that that's a huge need that serves every kid in this county, and it's something that's been needed for a long time. Steve Wyatt's been here for 18 years or whatever it is, and he said, I've been talking about this ever since I got here 18 years ago. And so that's why that's on there. So it would be a swap for Sugarloaf for our current bus garage property.
So that land swap, since the school board and the county are essentially one and the same, there would be no need for another like appraisal or anything like that.
No,
There-
on this piece of property, no, because we're not going to be peeling anything away and then talking about
Okay.
something else, not like the VFW property. This would be just a straight up swap. We would get the property at Sugarloaf, they get the property there, deeds are written up by the attorneys, boom, boom, boom. It's right hand to right hand.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
Yeah.
saying.
And then we have the money in the budget, 3.3 million. And previously, we had looked at and we had priced the bus garage, and this was last year. It's $2 million. So we added an extra $1 million onto there because everything's more expensive right now.
2
and
years,
so
you might have to add another
you
million.
you might.
Yeah.
So we put $3 million in there for now. We need to get this project going immediately. We need to start planning. We need to start grading. That property has significant grading issues that we're going to have to get around. There's a big ravine down there. But this is much needed, and we need to get on this thing right away.
It truly presents a tremendous opportunity when you think about, again, this board's strategic effort to position the school system to serve students for generations to come, right? And also to benefit the community when we think about the current property and its adjacency to the transfer station and the solid waste center, and how that could potentially serve whatever the county's needs are moving forward. It really does present, as we talk about in our Leader and Me environments, a win-win for everyone involved. Looking across these capital outlay dollars, I will simply echo what you heard Mr. Craven say. It is part of this 4-year evaluation that the Board of Commissioners created a support structure, a dedicated capital support structure for the school system that was much needed. And these are dollars that had never been present for us before. And so when you think about receiving nearly $20 million over a 4-year period to be able to, again, address and move this 10-year facility, these priorities forward, we are in such a fortunate position, the relationship that we have with the commissioners and the investment that every member of our county is making in our public school system. It is truly a step forward. And so, again, glad to answer any questions about any of the items that are listed here. There are none? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Sr2 and Sr3. Again, remembering these are those relief dollars that are from the federal government that are drawn down by school systems. They pass through the state educational agency, which is Department of Public Instruction, and then they are to be distributed directly to local education agencies, which are school systems like ourselves. I shared this slide with you before just so that you can understand, again, we're talking about billions of dollars across the entire country. As those dollars then come to school systems, they have been designated for very specific purposes. Sr2, or the Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund 2, so round 2 of those dollars, is just over $9.9 million for Henderson County Public Schools. We talked a little bit about what these dollars are, and then again, the two key features that I like to remind everybody, they are dollars that have expiration dates, so they're not dollars that you get to hold forever and ever, amen. They're dollars that have an expiration, and Sr2 expires on September 30th. And then they're dollars that have very specific uses. They've been given this bulleted list. This is how we can apply for those dollars through the federal grant programming. And then once we receive them, we can use them for those reasons. Sure. When we started talking about Sr2, I shared with you that this had a very unique connection to what was taking place in the state of North Carolina. That most recent legislation that was actually passed over our spring break dealt with HB 82, or the requirement to offer summer learning programming to all students in all school systems across the state of North Carolina. And that legislation said, and you have federal money to do this. This is where that money comes from because it specifically says in this particular piece to address summer learning and supplemental after-school programming. And so when we talk about how we achieve that, how we do that work, how we fund that, and the directives for how we compensate people, the bonuses that can be earned, the requirements of those operations, because again, it is transportation, meal service, instructional service, enrichment programming, and otherwise. All of those things have to be attached to those resources. So I've tried to give you a broad stroke view of how that $9.9 million is going to be utilized based on our recommendation to the board moving forward. So legislated summer learning. When we looked at our targets, we started talking about we are directed to identify at-risk student populations. We're directed to compensate employees in some certain ways. We're directed and encouraged to highly incentivize staff participation in that and pay additional bonuses based on eligibility. And then we thought about what capacity we would be able to offer, because ultimately how our staff it then creates space availability for voluntary participation for any other families that would want their children to do so. That's K-12. It's elementary school all the way through high school. Remembering this, we were required to offer this programming 150 hours or 30 days. Required to do that. So you're essentially talking about an entire, what I like to think about, a new school year in the summer months in a way that we've never had to do before across K-12 environments. When we think about what that's going to cost us based on our initial planning, that planning number is $4.5 million. So almost half of that money is going to operate the school system over the summer based on the way that we've structured those recommendations. And I want to share a couple of key details, and then I'll answer any questions, and then let Dr. Fry speak any more to the things that I've left out or learned. But I want to first say an extraordinary thank you to our instructional services team and Dr. Fry's leadership. It is no small task to have legislation appear on the horizon, then get passed over spring break that says run summer school for 150 hours. Like, it is no small task to create the framework, the instructional guidelines, the human resources recruitment element for that, and then be able to be at the ready to do that work. Like, it is extraordinary work because it's, again, never happened before in this way and in this shape or form. And again, some of the directives associated with that were very specific. I'll give you an example. The legislation states that if you're a nationally board certified teacher or you've ever received an EVOS bonus before, that you are to receive a $1,200 bonus for participating in that work. The legislation states that if you're teaching grade 3 reading and those students achieve proficiency by the end of the summer session, that you're to receive $150 per student that does that. Again, all that has to be factored into that $4.5 million. Not to mention, we've just maybe made it through the most difficult teaching and learning year in public education's history, and we're asking staff to participate in summer efforts. And so our build around that, and again, the legislative piece that says local boards are encouraged to highly incentivize people's participation in that, we've built a structure around that that really looks like two things. For all of our certified teaching staff, they're receiving their daily rate of pay plus essentially $20 an hour, which means based on where you are on that spectrum of early service to late service, you're making anywhere between $40 and $50 an hour to participate as a certified teacher in summer programming. Again, highly incentivize that work. If you're a non-certified person, you're making your daily rate of pay plus an additional $10 an hour for any participation in that space. So that gives you that $20 to $30 range for people to be able to do that. We have to run our school buses. We have to feed all the children that are there. We have to make sure that we serve and support the instructional and the enrichment needs for everybody. And what has gone live just Tuesday of this week was the application opportunity for all the employees that want to participate in it. So we've shared the instructional expectations with folks. We've shared with them the compensation structure. And now we've said, all right, now we need to know who wants to do this so that we can staff it across the board. It is our intention to run summer school at every school location, with the exception now of Hendersonville High School, because it cannot be operated there for them to transition during that period of time. But we know the strongest structures for serving students, especially students who might be identified at risk, are the relational factors that come from adults and school communities who know the children in those adults and school communities. So that's order of operations. We have to determine staff. Then we can determine capacity. Then we send out invitations. And then we have opportunities for anybody else who would like to attend based on space availability. So that's big bucket one. And if it's all right with Mr. Craven, I'm going to stop right there because there may be questions for Dr. Fry or myself as it relates to summer school and summer learning opportunities.
Question.
Yes, sir.
With this 4.5 million, will that cover our expenses for summer school?
It will. Again, Mr. Socia requires us to think very conservatively, and he says, what would it be the maximum it would cost us if everybody could earn a bonus and everybody earned those rates and it was fully staffed and all the, we were rolling all of that into, if we were fully staffed and all those required bonuses were in play, this would be the amount we'd be spending. So we have to have that as a planning number. We may spend less than that based on operationally what happens over summer learning and who chooses to participate. But Mr. Socia likes to make sure that we've got enough money to pay the bills. And so, yes, sir, we plan accordingly.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
We talked about incentivizing for our teachers and our assistants, which I totally agree with. Are we also doing anything to incentivize employment for our cafeteria workers, custodians, bus drivers, all those support staff, even our childcare workers, because that's going to be more, I'm sure we're going to have to do some after-school childcare.
Mm-hmm. The categories for the incentives are available to all employees that are part of the summer school work, and that is every employee group.
Except for one.
Yeah, and
Principals and assistant principals.
Actually, no, we've gotten some clarification
you
on
do
that.
have clarification.
We do.
Okay.
So if you're a 12-month employee, right, all 12-month employees are not part of the summer school effort, but we recognize that there are designated employees that would be part of that. And so think about it this way. Each day there's got to be a summer school administrator.
Right.
I'm a 12-month employee. I'm already earning my daily rate of pay, but I'm going to be able to earn the supplemental rate on top of
Good.
that
Okay,
plus
so
$20.
they'll get the $20.
So they'll get the $20 an hour, and if they're the 8-hour person, they're going to get that 160, right? And again, wouldn't be the all administrators, but the designated one. And so you can think about that sort of being shared across the school system for different administrative groups and otherwise. But what we recognize is everybody that's part of this work is valued, right? This is not a small lift, and we want to incentivize that, and we certainly don't want to leave anybody on the outside looking in. Again, it doesn't mean that we can have as many staff as want to participate. It is not that way, right? When we start thinking about, yes, we can have administrative staff, yes, we're going to have teaching staff, and we've built those structures for what that looks like across the school system. And then we're going to look at who is volunteered to participate and build it accordingly.
Custodians as well.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Because if you're operating school in a school, you got to take care of those classroom facilities. So same things would apply. Mm-hmm. Dr. Fry, anything else you'd like to add as it relates to the intent, feel, or instructional framework for summer?
Just one thing, as you know, the legislation is clear that summer learning is to be fun. And last week we were able to push out a survey to community partners who had indicated an interest in supporting our summer learning, and we have already received over 15 community partners who would like to either come into our schools to facilitate learning, enrichment, hands-on, engaged activities, or invite us to bring students to their site. So we're going to bring the fun.
That's great thinking. That's good.
Yes, and as a reminder, this is entirely in person. This is not a virtual experience. This is not a remote experience. This is an in-person experience for people that choose to participate in it. Only. That's correct. And as Dr. Fry said, the legislation says fund. Like those 3 letters are in fact in the legislation.
When are you going to push this out to parents and when do you expect us, we've got 5 weeks of school left, I think.
Mm-hmm.
When do you expect to know the numbers and how many staff you're going to have and that sort of thing?
Our application process runs through May 7th, which again, you'll notice is tied directly to the submission for this application. We're getting a real clear picture. We're actually very excited about the number of people who have already said yes.
Teachers?
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Cool.
I was looking at it last night, and I was just inspired by
Wow.
the number of employees who have said, I'll help with this.
I was going to ask that. So you think it's looking good?
We have well over 300 submissions right
wow.
now for
Really?
staff. Yes, but I want to attach that to us saying we're going to take care of you
Yeah.
for doing this. When we talk about highly incentivized, like we're doing it. This board is supporting an effort that's saying If you're going to work this summer, you're going to be compensated, and you're going to be compensated well, right? This is after-hours employment. This is overtime employment. This is people working outside of their contractual year, and this is going to run from June 9th until July 22nd. You know, you were looking at that operation.
Now, the money that they do make is not going to count towards their retirement or any of that. It's just it's basically like contracted employment, correct?
At this time, that's exactly how it's designed. Yes, sir. Is that accurate? Yep. Mm-hmm.
How do you, if you're a student, tell me how do you know you need to go? And how do you know you don't have to go? And how do you, what if you're on the line? I mean,
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways for that to be defined, Mr. Yoff. One of the ways is we're going to be very specific about our invitations because we have to define at risk. And so across K-12, that can look in different ways. That can be a student who maybe was unengaged during this last school year. It could be someone who didn't make appropriate academic progress. It could be someone who was really struggling with particular core concepts or issues or otherwise. If I'm an upper grade student, it might be a student who didn't course complete, right, and now needs credit recovery or needs to make sure that they're making progress toward graduation. But our individual schools, those staff members who best know, as you were saying, the teachers, Mrs. Cave, who best know, are going to be targeting those students who need the direct invite. So that's somebody who we believe, because we are required to identify those students, should receive an invitation. And we hope that those invitations would be welcomed and accepted to participate. Beyond that, any space availability is an opportunity for someone else who says, I just like the opportunity to participate. I want that added enrichment and bridge to the new school year because this last school year has been one like any other. And so people, again, it is entirely voluntary. We cannot require anybody to work in summer school, although we're excited about the people that have submitted. And I saw some of our finest teachers' names on those lists, some of the most effective teachers in our school system. But for students and students' families, if you wonder if it's me, I would invite that conversation with your teacher. I would invite that conversation between your parent and the teacher about how that might benefit you.
Or we should just be able to look at our emails who said our children
Right.
have suffered this year. So, put
Are
that
these
list in.
coming from test scores?
No, ma'am, not necessarily because, assessments are not the only way that we're measuring progress. I think historically we think about that as a testing metric of student progress or otherwise, but we're really talking about what is it that we've witnessed from a student in terms of what their content has been.
So do you think that a student, like a high school student who needs credit recovery, will say 5 courses, that they would be able to receive that?
So like most credit recovery, it's going to depend on the student because they're pacing through that coursework. What they are still needing to recover can be dependent. And again, I'll flip it to Dr. Fry here. But when we think about how credit recovery works at the high school level, there's a self-paced nature to that. That means some kids might take longer than other students until you meet that standard for earning credit. Okay, Dr. Fry?
And we'll also ask their current teachers to identify the standards in which they still need to become proficient. So that will play a role in it as well.
So it'll be a lot of individualized, the teachers are going to be directly
Absolutely.
reaching where they're at.
Absolutely.
But Wendy, the high school kids will just come and do their recovery, and then they're not going to have to stay the whole summer.
That is correct. And we're looking and talking with the high school principals, really looking at some different models and thinking about maybe the morning would be, I'll just throw this out, math and social studies, the afternoon, ELA and science, because we feel like that balance will be crucial for high school students in the summer. And know that they won't need the entire time to be face-to-face instruction. Even though we are required to offer that, we believe that it would be most productive to have a schedule such as that, Ms. Case.
I'll touch on the other 2 bullets for a second, and if I could, I'm going to move in opposite order. You see the health and safety facility improvements, and again, think about that as capital, and I'm going to tie it back to the requirements of how the funding gets used as an opportunity for us to think about it. The 3rd bullet recommendation is a retention bonus to all employee groups, and I want to be specific about that because the legislation, as it relates to these ESSER funds, don't allow us to, for example, provide a bonus or a payment to people in current year, right? For example, for having worked this current year. But what it explicitly does state is it talks about the continuity of your workforce. It talks about keeping your current employees, maintaining that workforce moving forward, especially as we move out of this. And that $3.1 million is really based on a recommendation that falls in this space. For all full-time employees, people that work 30 hours or more, that would be a retention bonus that would be paid in the fall of 2021, $2,000 per employee. For all part-time employees, those are people that work less than 30 hours a week, it would be $1,000 per employee. And again, as a retention bonus, it would be one of those things that would be offered to employees in the upcoming school year. Mr. Rhodes, who had to step away because he's actually in a teacher recruitment fair right now, and we want to make sure that we're doing recruitment. And when we think about the fact that we are just about to post the vacancies that we anticipate for our upcoming school year based on retirement and otherwise, we want to make sure that we keep all of our very best people and people are incentivized to move forward. And again, we value what everybody's moved through in this period of time. And so that third piece is related to, as I said, full-time employee groups and part-time employee groups, but it would be everyone who had served in the school system in the previous year. And when I say everyone, and again, I would define that for you as being a permanent full-time or permanent part-time employee, meaning you'd worked for us over that period of a 6-month period. Mr. Bridges?
Talking about recruitment, just briefly, do we have any signing bonuses available?
Currently, we do not. We don't have a structure for paying a signing bonus in Henderson County. We've discussed about whether or not that's a direction that we might want to go, as evidenced by hard-to-staff positions. But currently, what we don't do is offer a signing bonus to any specific positions that are associated with that. And so I'm going to flip back and forth between these two, but I just want to, again, show you this slide one more time. So when you think about Sr2 and the application that's required on our behalf, we've given you 3 big buckets for how that $9.9 million would be used. The highlights are what are the eligible areas for the funding recommendations we've made. Summer learning, supplemental after school. Why is that one highlighted? Well, if you're in a year-round environment, your summer is very different. You know, Bruce Drysdale and Hendersonville Elementary School, the summer programming actually will apply to their intersessions when they have intersession. These funding can be utilized all the way through October of next year as those folks are working through in that space. Addressing learning loss, and then school facility repairs to reduce the transmission and support student health. So when we start thinking about capital projects that are related to student health and improved conditions in our facilities, we're able to outline more projects associated with capital needs there. And then implementing activities to maintain the operation and continuity of services and to employ existing staff. So that's that piece that's related to the retention bonus and keeping your current folks in that space. Before I speak any further about Sr3, I want to just go to this one slide, and then I'll flip back if there are any questions. Application opened April 1st. It's due May 7th. That's so that we receive funding in this current fiscal year, and it is the only funding that we would have available to operate summer learning. So it is critically important. If we estimate that it's going to cost us $4.5 million to run summer school, it's critically important that we're at the ready for that May 7th deadline. And again, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Fry and say thank you so very much. Dr. Fry has been leading the charge on that narrative because like all other funding, it is grant required. We have to write a detail associated with that. We have to present a budget. We have to be ready to have that evaluated at the state level, approved, and then make any necessary modifications if they're recommended. And then, of course, to work within that space, because all of those are planning numbers. All of those are planning numbers. And based on what takes place between now and the start of the new school year, we would make adjustments accordingly.
Has that application been submitted yet?
No, sir, but it is at the ready. Absolutely. We are ready to roll. And Dr. Fry, I believe if I told her go today, she would say we are ready to submit. So, but before we submit that application, we would like the board's blessing to sprinkle some holy water on us and let us know what questions you have associated with that.
All right. Couple questions. I think the 4.5 you have to have in there. That's a good placeholder. And I know as part of the application process, we just have to have these figured out now, and then we can go and we can make an adjustments as we need to with those dollars.
Yes, sir. That is my understanding. And I do want to add that song, I Get By With a Little Help from My Friends. I have had a whole lot of help with this application.
Good deal. The retention bonus. So you said 2,000 for every certified 1,000.
Not sort of full-time employees, so
Full-time.
30 hours or more. So regardless of job classification, if you were a full-time employee, $2,000. If you're a part-time employee, so 29 hours or less, would be 1,000.
So I have seen in budgets, I know there's not a budget yet for the state of North Carolina, and inside of those budgets there were bonuses for teachers, community college, university teachers, K-12, non-cert staff. Do we have any updates on that? And would that be in lieu of if they didn't provide that, or is this in addition to?
So right now, just as you mentioned, the governor's budget that was published offered bonuses to employees across the board, the state of North Carolina. I think that would be a perfect opportunity for the board to give consideration to. Okay, well, if let's say that version of a budget were approved, then maybe it would be in lieu of. If that were an opportunity that the state took on, then the board might consider utilizing these dollars in a different way. You may do it in addition to as well, because there's no requirement that says if the state does that, now you can't do it. Or again, you may say, all right, and if nothing happens, we want to do that ourselves. I think the board has tremendous flexibility when it comes to thinking about how that might be used at the state level, because we'll know more before the fall of 2021 depending on what the state does in terms of their budget approval.
Maybe.
We hope.
Maybe.
Right. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We're still in the continuation budget from 2 years ago, aren't we?
Yes, sir.
I mean,
Yes, sir.
so
Yeah.
there's
But I think your point is a really good one, because it creates, again, another opportunity for this board to talk about what your priorities are with that. We certainly recognize continuity of our workforce is critically important.
Absolutely.
Right? We have to have our very best people stay with us, and we want to make sure that we attend to that and value that in whatever way is possible for us. And while we know that there are folks that are retiring or choosing other professions or taking a left turn or a right turn right now, when we think about moving forward, we recognize the value of the continuity in that respect. And I think the governor's proposed budget and others, maybe from the General Assembly, may try to address that as well.
Yeah, I just think we should keep that in mind. Like, I'm all for bonusing, especially after this year, and we have to do it as a retention bonus. But we need to keep in mind and look at what the governors really, if they come together for a budget this year, what that does. Are they bonusing teachers? Are they increasing pay? What does that look like? And could we use those funds then, if they did get bonused, for another purpose? Just something to think about down the line if it happens. I'm all for giving them a bonus if they do the same thing they've done for the past 2 years, which is nothing in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is that the in addition to makes more sense as people are planning for what they're going to do next year, because if that question mark, like you said, who knows when we'll get the answer to that question.
Yeah.
But if that's in people's minds as they're planning what they'll do for next year,
Yeah.
we certainly want them back. And if they know that it's going to be in addition to,
Yeah.
no matter what happens in Raleigh, I think they're making their plans, and we want to keep those people.
Yeah, I think the teachers that are coming back are coming back. I think this is just the ice cream, like, thank you for making it last year.
Right.
Personally, I don't know that a bonus is going to make somebody say, oh, I'm going to stay or not. Maybe it does. I don't know. But in my mind, we have a whole list of safety needs that we have in this county. With West Henderson, we're spending $2 million, but we needed another $9 million to actually complete the back of the building. We have $42 million project for East High right now, because all their buildings are scattershot all over the place, right? To make that a safer campus. We've got millions of dollars at Apple Valley. We've got $2.5 million at Hendersonville Elementary to create a kindergarten wing. We've got Atkinson that's got I don't even know how many millions that was to fix the $2 million to fix the inside courtyard thing they've got there at the skylights and all their deal. And so there's a lot of needs there. And so I would just, if the governor and they come out with an actual budget and they're like, hey, we're going to give everybody $2,000 as a bonus, I think we need to really think about, is that a $4,000 bonus? Is that really is that what we want to do? Or do we take that $3 million right there and build a wing at a school? Close Raleigh, close in West.
Excuse me.
Sure.
I would just like to echo and say, it's not just about the money, it's about the statement that this board makes if we didn't give them in addition to. I know we have so many needs, I don't think I'll ever live to see them all
Sure.
fixed, but it's about the people in our organization. It's about those teachers who are working daily and with those children and all the support staff. That's what makes our school buildings come alive. And I've never been about, I know this board has a responsibility about school buildings. I know that. That's not my passion. My passion is the people piece. And if this board, I just would not be in favor at all of taking this money and not giving it to our school employees, regardless of what the state does, regardless. This is us saying, we appreciate what you've done this year. So,
Well, and along those same lines, we need to be, as a board and a responsible fiduciary of money, we need to be, and we are, careful of, if we giving somebody a bonus is different than giving somebody a yearly raise.
oh yeah,
Hiring
yeah.
people that we may have money for and the ability to now, but in 3 years, not. We just need to be very careful spending money that we may have now and not
Sure.
create, because I plan, again, if the Lord's willing and if my wife says it's okay, I plan on being on this board. I'm going to run again. I'm going to be on this board in 6-7 years. I don't want to have a conversation that says we promised this money 4 years ago. Now what are we going to do? We don't have this money because I'm not going to.
I don't think this is
I don't want to be
recurring.
there.
I mean, it's
I just
like
want to
one
be there.
time.
I'm just saying. I just don't
This is
want to
just
make sure
one-time
that we're
money.
not creating.
I guess, kind of echoing that. I want to make sure this is a one time that this is going to
Yeah,
happen.
this is one
30
time.
whatever $1 million that we're going to receive over the next year and a half, and we have to be very cognizant of how we're spending that money to last a long time. And I want to bonus our employees. I don't necessarily know if it's the best avenue to use money if the state says, here's a $2,000 bonus for all employees. I think where we could do better then is increasing the supplement. Now, that's a little bit slightly different conversation because that's
reoccurring.
local
Yes.
expense, current expense, right?
Mhm.
Let's find a way to find that extra quarter point. That's recurring forever.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, if I see a $3 million chunk of change and I can add a wing to a school that's going to be there for 30, 40 years, or I'm halfway to paying for the rest of Weston and closing that space, or Atkinson, to me, that is a meaningful long-term project that we can get done. But I'm willing to, it's all what if this happens or what if that happens.
Exactly.
And
That's
like
a
I said,
discussion we'll have down the road.
We'll have it down
Yeah.
the road. 2 years ago, we were having this discussion about putting some money together for. I know we were talking about raising our supplement at that time. But we haven't had a budget,
Yeah.
and so that's. I mean, we might not have a budget.
I
Who
know.
knows? And if we don't, you spend the money on them.
Yeah. And another thing I don't want to forget, because I think, Mr. Bridges, your point about signing bonuses, we need to address that. I don't know if Buncombe County is still doing signing bonuses, but I know 4 years ago we were losing math teachers to Buncombe County because they had a signing bonus. And you can't find math teachers anyway. And so when right next door is offering a signing bonus, we've got to be competitive. So I don't want that to go off our radar.
I would like to think about that in terms of the new teaching class that we have, and we're going to be hiring another teacher and looking at hiring a second teacher for that, right? I'd really like to look at ways to find signing bonus to try to offer bringing those kids back if they actually get into the profession.
Oh, yeah.
You
That'd
know,
be so
how
cool.
awesome is that? Like, you go to school, follow you go to school, you graduate, you've done well, you've interned here, whatever the case may be. Here's a signing bonus and a pool of money that we've got set aside for those kids to come back. I think that would be awesome. I've always thought of signing bonuses, especially if I'm already working there, like, dude, I've been working here for 5 years and you didn't give me any signing bonus, but you're going to give the new person a signing bonus. It's always kind of stuck in
That's
my craw
tough.
a little bit, you know?
That's tough.
I mean, it's like when DirecTV offers, you know,
Right,
the
exactly.
cheaper package to
That's
everybody else
right.
but me, and I've been there for 10 years.
But I do know that we've got some hard areas to staff, that being special education, math, science, you know,
Sure.
I
I
think,
do, to increase diversity efforts for those hard to find teachers in
Yeah.
special subject areas, to really grow our own and find a way to grow our own. I know Dr. Bryan and I have had conversations with outside groups that want to help with that effort.
that's
I
great.
don't know where that's at. I know some school systems that are even paying off those kids' student loans, or helping to pay off those teachers' student loans if they come back and teach for X number of years. And so I'd love to look outside of the box on how we can use
Like
those
you said,
dollars.
you got to grow your own, but you got to take care of your own too.
That's
do.
right.
That's right.
You do.
That's
And
right.
Dr. Fry, you might be already harvesting this from the HCPS seniors list where they're declaring where they're going and what they're majoring. Have you seen how many are majoring in education?
I love it.
That's great.
Maybe we should get their phone number and, and
Stalk 'em.
That's a
start
great
stalking them
idea.
on Facebook.
Dr. Scott Rose Rolodex. He can hit him up.
Let me
That's
take
right.
you
We
to
have your phone
lunch.
number now. We're going to
It's-
keep it.
It's pretty
Right.
exciting though to see how many of
It
our
is.
good students, I mean, our high level students are majoring in education at this point. So
That's great.
Bernie, how much money will teachers get, take home money out of $2,000 after taxes and?
That would be different for about every paycheck we
Give me a
wrote.
guess.
Um, I-
$1,400,
Yeah.
$1,500,
gonna
say Yeah.
And $1,000 will be,
30%, 70% of
I was
that.
gonna say 70% is
$700.
a good number to
but
go
see,
with.
we're not, I mean, it sounds big here for us because we're paying it, but what they taking home is not what they're getting paid here.
That's right.
Sure.
We need to remember that. And the retention, did they have to be here all this year to get this bonus?
So we consider a permanent employee, you have to have worked at least 6 months.
6 months?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Mhm.
I like it as a placeholder. Keep it. We can always discuss it later, right? Health and safety. Let's go over that a little bit. And what are your
Absolutely.
thoughts there?
And kind of as you talked about, I'll use Atkinson as a good example. When we talk about health and safety is a pretty broad circumstance. Atkinson's capital project recommendations are related to the health and safety of that school environment, the air in that building, its ability to be circulated and recirculated, associated with, it has a whole series of interior, exterior spaces is what I like to call it. Like when you can exit into these outdoor classroom spaces, if you will, almost like courtyards. And when we did our 10-year facility assessment, we recognized there can be some real safety concerns with egress and otherwise associated with that school facility. And so a number of recommendations were made from a health and safety standpoint. And so when we look through our 10-year facility assessment, this board would be given an opportunity to sort of look at other capital opportunities with the designated dollars that were remaining and start to tackle those issues as well. Ventilation, HVAC, airflow transfer, all are targeted areas within that space. And I'll use one more big example associated with the entire school system. At the beginning of this process, there was much conversation around recirculating as much fresh air as you could. We have a lot of buildings that don't have operable windows at all, right? So we were unable to open a window to allow fresh air to come in. It was entirely operating on, and so building envelope matters. And Ms. Holt, I've put her on the spot 3 or 4 times, but she's probably going to nod her head with me again, is we know that the most effective HVAC systems function when the building envelope is proper, right? So you need high quality, well insulated, well sealed windows and doors in order for your HVAC system to work. But this board could consider things like a large-scale investment in window replacement across the entire school system that would upgrade the envelope and create opportunities for us to address fresh air circulation and otherwise in places where that had previously not occurred. And so we would be making recommendations in that space to this board to consider. So which of those items do we want to prioritize? We could look at specific school facilities, but we can also look at investments that touch all school facilities that are not at that code responsibility. So,
Couple questions I have on that.
Sure.
So if you go back to our MRTS money, right?
Yes, sir.
A lot of that is health and safety. You know, you got $750,000 in cameras that we're going to buy and $300,000 in Chromebooks that pops out. So that's $1 million and some change. Is that kind of interchangeable as well? Can you buy Chromebooks in there? Can you buy cameras in there? Is that part of that as well? And really, with that, when do we have to spend those monies? We have to buy those windows by the end of.
So the SR2 dollars specifically expire September 30, 2023. So we've got about a 2-year window from the time that they're drawn down. To kind of answer your questions, I refer to these bullets as broadly specific.
Yeah.
Okay, that you think the technology one is a good question. Purchasing educational technology includes hardware, software, connectivity,
Right.
and otherwise. Pretty clearly stated.
Right.
Okay, that's an opportunity there. When you look at the school facility repairs, it has this clause to reduce the risk of virus transmission, to support student health, and then implementing protocols and assisting with school opening. So I think every one of those questions is one we're going to have to evaluate kind of with those rubrics. And so whether I gave examples like window envelope, because we know that the air circulation has been part of the recommendations that address dealing with the reduction in virus transmission. And so there's an opportunity there. I think every facility repair that we would consider would have to be discussed within that space. And thinking about that.
When you're filling out the grant, are you getting that specific? Like we're looking at the health and safety, like we're looking at replacing all the windows? Or how specific is that grant?
We do not have to get that specific. What we have to do is we have to give the reason behind it and how it relates to COVID and the need arose due to that. But we don't have to get into the details with this particular application.
It's going to be when we actually draw the dollars.
I think it will be in the monitoring of how we spent the dollars, yes.
Right. The three sort of phrases that we've been that have been shared with us at the state level and that we have been reiterating and re-echoing, and you heard Dr. Fry say it is as the result of, in response to, or the prevention of moving forward. You know, so when you think about what we've learned over this last 12 months, and we're talking about, when we're sort of asking ourselves the question, is this an eligible expense associated with that? Like, is it the result of what has happened? Is it in response to what has happened? Or is it in prevention of that moving forward? Because the goal of a lot of these federal dollars is, even though we don't want to talk about this, is to be readier for a future circumstance like this. And so when we talk about upgrading our facilities or equipping our resources or serving our students, that we'd be able to address all those elements.
This is going to be an ongoing expense too. It's just not going to end in 1 year or two. 2.3 probably wouldn't touch all our improvements that we need to make in our school system. No, sir.
No, sir. And in some ways, that is kind of a perfect segue to the third element, which is that's 2.3 as it associates with ESSER2. ESSER3, which is $22 million, is that next round, all the same qualifying factors with the exception of the first 20% being to deal with learning loss, specifically that learning loss element there. And even though these funds expire a year later, and they potentially could be submitted for at the same time, we recognize there are opportunities for a more deliberate and strategic conversation with the board, hopefully at the board's pleasure, maybe even over the summer, that we don't have the need for these dollars immediately. But to your point, there are large-scale needs across the school system that can be discussed in a much more broad stroke regarding those dollars as well. And so as we think about what that application might look like, we know we have to hit May 7 because we have to have funding for summer school. No ifs, no ands, no buts. Those three buckets we've talked about. ESSER3 is an opportunity for us to come back together in a similar workshop session and really focus on those things and talk about strategic priorities in that space.
Have the schools already been told to start ordering stuff, or?
They've been told to order materials and supplies for summer learning program. Yes, ma'am. And Dr. Fry has even budgeted for that and given people the ability to make those purchases right now so that we can get ready.
It'll probably take that long to get them through the mail to get
Yes,
them.
ma'am. Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there other questions about ESSER2 or ESSER3 before I just give two quick updates because we are just about to 2 o'clock, Mr. Craven? That's good. Any other questions from members of the board? What we would ask of you is maybe 2 business items. If you have any questions or any clarifications between now and when we meet again on May the 10th, that you'd let us know. Remembering again that part of our board agenda on May 10th involves a public hearing for our budget request, because then Mr. Sosha and myself have to send a transmittal to the Board of Commissioners officially on behalf of the Board of Education as it relates to this budget proposal. So if there are questions or additional information that you need between now and then, that you would not hesitate to let us know We feel like we wanted to make sure we address the questions that were asked in the first session, give additional clarifications and information on that front before we meet again on the 10th. Okay?
Did we get it set in what Blair's talking about, getting that second teacher for this teacher training?
Yes, ma'am. We are working through that
Okay.
so that we would be able to make sure that that were an opportunity for us. Mhm.
Just for my clarification, I've been through enough of these budget meetings. I ought to know the answer to this, but I don't. So we talked about another teacher allocation for the new program that Dr. Fry was talking about, and we also talked about, do we increase the allocation of musical instruments or not? So when do we make those decisions, or when does that come?
So I'm going to work those in order. So specific to Ms. Case's question and yours as it relates to the teaching position, we're looking at that as part of our state allotment currently,
Okay.
right? We could determine it as part of our local current expense depending on what happens with that uncontrollable,
Okay.
but that one kind of makes us nervous, right? We want to look at our teaching allotment and our teaching positions as a way of addressing that board priority, okay?
Okay,
So that
alright.
we feel confident we can make that happen.
But I think we will find the money for that $50,000 to hire that teacher.
Okay.
We'll
Right.
find it.
Right.
Okay.
And two, the musical instrument one is one that you sort of have year-long flexibility
Okay.
on, because if we delegate the $90,000 and you approve that, and that's the budget we begin the fiscal year with, that strategic capital line stays there. And at any time, the board could decide,
I could bring that up every meeting.
every meeting, you could bring it up. That's exactly right. You could say,
Go,
let's
girl.
take $50,000 and let's divvy out now. You're
Okay.
exactly right. That's how that would work. So you sort of have 12 months to talk about that one if you'd like. Or no, Mr. Social likes to make sure we spend everything by, so we would want to make sure we did
Well,
that, not
Just
within a
let us
12-month
know
period.
before you start spending the ESSER and the capital, and we will have discussions on that prior to the check being cut. That
Oh,
makes sense?
absolutely. I think we would expect that the ESSER especially will become a regular report. You'll want to know kind of where we are, that we would be sharing with you what we've learned and what we're operating with in that space.
And I know this has nothing to do with budget, but I would just encourage all of us to start thinking about, I know we have an equity update every school board meeting, but I think we as a school board have a responsibility to think about what are some of those subtle things that we do to close doors for children, or maybe in a more positive way, not open doors for all children, like the band instruments or musical instruments. If that is a door closer, we need to be zeroing in on those kinds of things. And it probably happens across all programs. I don't know. But I think we have to be hypersensitive to that and hyper in tune to that as we move forward and talk about equity. We want to have equal access for all of our programs, even to the point where, I've been associated with some school districts that operate afternoon bus transportation home just so children who don't have that transportation can participate in after-school activities. I think, again, what excites me is I've heard the chairman say today, we need to think out of the box. We've got to start thinking out of the box on some of these issues. So I'm excited.
I agree completely, because equity isn't a little box. It can be a plethora of things
That we may not even realize.
that we don't realize. And I think, like, kind of the perfect example today was, I didn't play saxophone in 5th grade because of that. But if we're just looking at high school instruments, then you're never going to find that 5th grader
That's right.
that can't play that instrument. And so I do think that needs to be incorporated into our equity update and how we can equity for all.
And maybe we could start with you guys telling us the doors that you have opened. Because I know, like, for instance, years ago when we had to have a bus fee for activities, and we weren't, I don't remember why we went to that. We were losing money or something. And then I know that it was brought down to the principals, like, each of your kids that can't afford this, you need to fill in and pay for it, and I'm sure there's tons of that going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. But if we discuss that and we know, then, we might go, oh, wait, but what about this?
Yeah,
What about
you
that?
don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so it would be advantageous for us to know even those things that seem kind of mundane or small, you know, that could be really huge for that kid in
Exactly.
particular. We have a lot of dollars here, and spending 500 on a kid to help get an instrument or whatever, cleats or whatever the thing may do that helps that kid stay in school and
Yeah.
progress
That's
is what we're
that's-
here for, right?
To me, you hit it on the dot. To me, it's that investment in that child that's going to be an
Yes.
investment
Sure.
in our community. I
Sure.
mean, that always, I mean, to me, it is a budget conversation because we're investing in that child
Yep.
and that's going to be, we'll get payback way beyond,
Exactly.
what we lay out for that. So
Sure.
I love that we would be adding that and supplementing that. in
And
our-
I have to say, I think, the entire leadership team and the staff who are listening or watching or the school communities just so appreciate that commitment. Like that commitment is about every child and every opportunity.
Absolutely.
That you would say like
Sure.
that is why we are here. We are here to, when you think about board policy and second, remove barriers, right? To make sure that the opportunity exists and to not have blind spots about what those things are, whether they're things that have a financial attachment or don't. The things that we do and
Maybe
how we do.
transportation.
Yes, ma'am. That we would address those. So I appreciate that charge and that support to make sure that that's the work that we're doing.
Do
Ms. Case?
principals still get a certain amount of money to help out kids? How
Yes,
much?
Well, I don't have a dollar figure in front of me because they get it from a variety of different sources. We could pull that together for you. I know, for example, like there's a community fund from the Education Foundation. There are needy children's funds that are supported at individual schools, but I don't know a specific dollar amount. But I know that one of the things that we are proud to say is that we have the flexibility at the school level to address those specific needs that Mrs. Holt talked about. When somebody says, I don't have, what we worry about is what Mr. Craven said is if you don't let us know or that doesn't come to us in some way, shape, or form, that someone may not participate or choose an activity or an opportunity simply because they didn't know there were resources there to help them.
And that still goes back to the teachers, because a lot, high school kids especially are not going to ask for help.
Yes,
because
ma'am.
They're
Right.
embarrassed.
Right.
Right.
But
Their teachers do it, or principal. I've had Luke Manuel when he was at Hendersonville Middle. He called me every year. Okay, I have 3 students now who can't go on the DC trip. Will you sponsor them? So I mean, they're opening doors. We just don't know about it.
Sure.
And do we have, kids can't afford glasses. They can't afford to go to the dentist. And, if we don't find out from them somehow or from the teachers, then we don't know how to give them those things. And so we need to come up with some kind of fund or something with the social workers or with the nurses or somebody that everybody knows that's there to help kids out.
Yes, ma'am. And we've got tremendous community partners that help us from dental agencies that are in our schools to
the
the
glasses.
line, exactly, like Kiwanis and Lions Club and
Lions
all these different groups that say like, how can we help? How can we help? And so we connect with them in those ways. Those are great
I
points.
think we had talked about this previously and it kind of got pushed aside because of COVID. We were starting to feed every kid at all of our schools. It's really huge that the USDA picked it up again for next year.
Oh, they did for
And
next
we
year.
will
I
be able
didn't
to
know
feed
that.
every single kid in
I
our
didn't
school
know
without
that.
asking. Because we had started started bringing carts out and like giving all the food carts and giving all kids food and everything. And it reduces that stigma. And we saw those numbers climb pretty drastically on who was getting the food.
Like
and
second chance breakfast.
absolutely. And so I want to make sure when that USDA money runs out, because it's going to run out,
We could still
that
do
we're still thinking about that, Bernie, and how we're going to make that work with all of our reimbursements. Because I know we had to didn't forget it, but we didn't have to worry about it.
I didn't know it was going for next
I
year.
want to say something and I know we're running out, but it was important. It was on my heart, but I want to thank you guys, the admin. I mean, we never thought we would go through what we've been through and what we're going through. And I just come to these meetings, and I've been here for 2 years, and I'm just like, it just wows me that we have the people that we have sitting up, orchestrating this, and we're just lowly school board members, and I'm just like, man, these guys are just out of sight,
Awesome.
And then I also want to thank the current relationship that we have with the commissioners. I know Blair, Amy Lynn, I mean, you guys, it hasn't always been like that. That's what kind of got me interested in being in school board when I saw Henderson High School and I saw the county and the school board getting. So I'm just it's awesome the relationship that we have. Finally, Noah Melton, is that right?
Music
sir.
teacher, North
That's
Henderson.
him.
Oh, yeah.
He sends, he goes out of his way. I mean,
Awesome.
that's not required, but
It's like
he
the
sends a long email and he
Singing
records all
Eagles
that stuff,
Friday
and it's
singing.
16 minutes. And I don't know if everybody had time to look at it or forgot to look at it or whatever, but I watched every minute of it, and I'm just like, this guy is giving it all. I mean,
Absolutely.
he's giving it his all. And so then I'm like thinking, how can we make that better? I mean, I don't know if every school has somebody like Noah. What I'm thinking of is I think there's a lot of loyalty to a school. I would rather there be a lot of loyalty to Henderson County. And if we have a teacher that is just absolutely 100% giving it his all, is he 100% utilized in one school? I mean, could he go to other schools and do the same thing? And rather than being a employee of East, could he be an employee of Henderson County? I mean, could he go? And I don't know if there are other examples, and I don't know if that's a bad idea. I just know that there are a lot of
Well,
people. Go ahead.
I'm going to challenge you a little bit.
Yeah.
In every one of our schools, they are full of Noah Meltons.
Okay,
Absolutely.
because
They're
I don't,
just not
I
sharing
don't
it
get
with us.
these.
Right.
I get these from Noah, and that's
right,
it.
right. They're just not sharing it. They're so busy, they're not sharing it with us. But
Okay.
yeah, they're all full of people just
Absolutely.
like him.
Okay, well that's good, because I'm just like, if we have one person, that's fine. If that's covered, that's covered. I'm just like looking at this, I'm like, oh
I
God,
know
this
it's
guy.
crazy.
But yeah, I appreciate what you said about the leadership here and the work that you do. Dr. Bryant, you're always so ready to pat everybody else on the back, and we appreciate that. But we appreciate you and your
Absolutely.
leadership. This would not happen without you. And again, with the relationship with our county commissioners. Yes, I've been here when it wasn't strong, and so I appreciate that. And thanks for saying that, Jay.
We greatly appreciate that and greatly appreciate the opportunity. We are humbled to serve in this community. We love our school system, and there are hundreds and hundreds of Noahs across this system doing extraordinary work for our families every day, and we're very, very grateful to do it. All right?
And on that note, I will accept a motion to dismiss.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, guys. No, we're off the air.